just 10 miles off the North American East Coast, in one of the world's busiest ship lanes, dolphins and whales frolic. The journey's goal is to discover a unique archipelago. The indigenous Lenape lived here in peaceful unity with nature until the arrival of the European colonialists. How has nature changed since then? What has been the impact of climate change and rising sea levels? A journey by boat takes us into this unknown island world hiding in plain sight with its tremendous natural wealth. The Verrazano Bridge marks the entry into a natural harbor that made it one of the most important marketplaces in the world. The bridge was named after the Italian seafarer Giovanni Verrazzano, who arrived here 500 years ago. Once the ships pass the bridge's 228-foot clearance, a panoramic view opens up onto New York, a city built on islands and surrounded by water. Eight million people live in this busy metropolis. There is hardly any room for animals and nature, but they are there, always ready to escape unpredictable danger. They live in parks, on and under streets, sometimes right in the center of the city life, but hardly noticed. For some of them, the city is an excellent hunting ground. Others benefit from the leftovers humans leave behind everywhere. Experts estimate that the number of species in New York City reaches into the thousands. Most all of them have perfectly adapted to city life. Parks, like Central Park, provide a natural habitat. Squirrels live here, as well as hundreds of kinds of birds, stopping here during migrations north or south. They depend on the insects they find here. What did New York look like 400 years ago? This question fascinates conservationist Eric Sanderson. He authored Mannahatta, a study that reconstructs New York's natural history in great detail. Along the northern tip of Manhattan, he kayaks into a bay that appears to be from another time.
For hundreds of years, people have looked at the river and they saw a means of transportation. But when I look at it, I actually see it as this hugely dynamic habitat, a habitat that's changing all the time. And not just in the water, but as it comes up into the land. And then, of course, the forest up above. Welcome to the Mannahatta, the island of many hills. And we're here at the northern end of Mannahatta, which is one of the greenest parts of Manhattan. It's one of the few places where you can come to Manhattan and actually get a sense of what it was like when Henry Hudson was here 400 years ago.
When the explorer Henry Hudson arrived here in 1609, Manhattan was a dense forest. The European colonialists who came after Hudson displaced the indigenous Lenape, took over the island, and blew up the rocks, to build the world's most modern city. Like Venice or Hong Kong, New York is a city built on an archipelago, surrounded by water. At the center lies Manhattan. The 23-square-mile island is the cradle of modern America. Its natural wealth is the main reason for the economic success of the city and the country. Even today, about 30% of Manhattan is green space, a habitat for animals like turtles and even coyotes. The entry to the harbor is marked by Liberty Island with its famous Statue of Liberty, and Ellis Island, home to the former Immigration Inspection Station. Across is the tip of America's largest island, Long Island, and the city's boroughs, Brooklyn and Queens. To the west is Staten Island, which can only be reached from Manhattan by its world-famous Orange Ferry. Two miles up the East River, wedged between Manhattan and Long Island, stretches Roosevelt Island. Every spring, the cherry blossoms attract numerous visitors. Many come by tram across the East River. Further up the East River towards Hell Gate are Mill Rock and Randall's Island, the latter so small that the Hell Gate Railway Bridge spans it. Hell Gate was once New York's most dangerous shipping passage. Over time, more than 1,000 ships were wrecked here against the rocks hidden beneath the surface of the water. Less than 100 years ago, those treacherous rocks were blown up. To the north of Hell Gate are South and North Brother Island. Uninhabited, both are unique bird sanctuaries. The rocks were formed toward the end of the last ice age, more than 16,000 years ago, and are the foundation of the New York archipelago. At the Inwood Hill Park in Manhattan, one can get an idea of what these rocks looked like before they were leveled to build the city. At the end of the 19th century, John Muir discovered that everything in nature is connected and dependent on something else. Eric Sanderson observed an extension of this principle that was essential for the development of nature in a city like New York.
When we were making the muir webs for Manhattan, we discovered something that I think is really interesting, which is that if you think about what a species needs, it rarely needs just one other species. More often it needs a bunch of other things. So for example, squirrels eat nuts, right? But what is nuts? It's not one kind of nut. It's acorns, it's hickory nuts, it's chestnuts, it's walnuts. And then each one of those, there's multiple kinds of trees. And so this idea is that if you depend on a group, then you're not dependent on any one individual. And that way you can be resilient even if the composition of the group changes over time. New York City is really at the forefront of this. We have this beautiful archipelago of islands and this beautiful productive estuary all around us. And every year, species keep coming back. The more we decrease pollution, the more we create habitat, the more species will return to the city.
New York's skyscrapers attract a bird of prey that for several decades was thought to be extinct, the peregrine falcon. The high-rise buildings are a perfect substitute for his natural habitat. Chris Nedoreski is a New York City employed biologist whose job requires highly acrobatic skills.
I've got animal carriers that we put the young birds in. These unfold and put animal carriers in. We've got climbing gear, like my climbing harness here. that I have to put on when I climb out on window ledges or on bridge girders.
The peregrine falcon is one of the fastest birds on the planet. It hunts at a speed of almost 200 miles per hour. The falcon's natural habitat includes mountain ledges where the female deposits her eggs without building a real nest.
Okay.
Some New York high-rises replicate those conditions perfectly.
Population was very healthy right up to about World War II, and then we started using pesticides like DDT for insect management, where it actually created a situation where the eggs became too thin to support an incubating female. So really we had no nesting pairs by the early 1960s, which means locally extinct.
Chris is going to fetch the falcon chicks from the nest for banding.
We're going to open these panels up very carefully, and I hear one of our adult birds. They're both out here. And the mother falcon is right in front of the nest. Back up there at the nest again. All right, so I'm gonna climb out and carefully retrieve the young. Gotta be careful for the adults.
For more than 35 years, Chris has been taking care of New York's falcons. Without him, they would not be here in New York City.
Okay, I'll take the carrier. Okay, here's one of the babies in the nest. Looks nice and healthy. I carefully put her in the carrier. Okay, nice and level. Here's one of the babies. And I'll take the second carrier. Oh, there she is at the nest. Here's the second baby. Looks healthy. All right, here's our second baby for the year. And we have one unhatched egg. This egg didn't hatch and at this point won't hatch. So we'll probably bring it in to have it tested. The peregrine falcon is one of those species that has shown its adaptability so well that in this concrete glass jungle that we have in these large cities, they're able to adapt and be really successful.
Francois Portman is an award-winning nature photographer. The Swiss native has been living in New York for more than 30 years. Every day he roams the urban jungle hunting for the perfect shot. It takes a great deal of patience and a good eye. He has photographed and filmed many animals living in the city. A visit to his studio offers a glimpse of his work.
The first thing you do is you go on the spot and you see what's going on. And then, of course, as a photographer, you do a lot of tries to have everything coming into place. Especially you have the light situation, how the birds and the wildlife, they're gonna react towards you and what they're gonna do, and you adapt. So that's what you learn. You see what's going on. And as a photographer, especially when you do wildlife, it's not like a fashion show where you can place the people or a feature film. You just try to get the best out of what you see and how you can actually get. There was a coyote in the park, and I packed my camera, tripod and everything. And as you can see, it's a difficult shot because it's full, it's very busy. So I spend probably 4 hours there. And of course, he's not doing anything because he's just waiting dusk to go on his hunt. Like, for example, here is a famous picture, the one on the book. The reason I say it's the most famous because it's been the most published. It's on a book cover, it's in magazines, in the country here, in Europe, in South Africa. But here I had actually a remote camera because I couldn't just stay near the nest, she wouldn't come. Actually, one day when I was placing the camera, the female kind of swooped over me as a warning. It's like, you're too close. And, I quickly left my camera set up and I backed up where I was able to shoot these with a longer lens. So that's what you learn. And how the birds and the wildlife, they're gonna react towards you and what they're gonna do, and you adapt. It's all that.
Across the East River, industrial history has left scars. Brooklyn and Queens are separated by a waterway branching off from the East River. For more than 100 years, unbelievable amounts of highly poisonous liquid waste was dumped into the water. The result? Newtown Creek, a Superfund site and one of the most polluted waterways in America. Willis Elkins is the executive director of the Newtown Creek Alliance. He wants to discover how nature can help revitalize such a highly polluted site.
So at this point, we're about 3.5 miles from the East River, and we've gone through a number of these right-angle turns here. So the exchange of this water with the East River is very minimal.
Every week, Ellis inspects the creek and takes water samples. The stagnating water, far from the entrance to the East River, provides the best conditions. He protects himself with rubber gloves and a mask. For centuries, oil refineries, tanneries, and paint and chemical factories dumped their waste right into the creek. Tons of heavy metal and poisonous slick has accumulated on the bottom of the river. Together with the city of New York, the Newtown Creek Alliance succeeded in stopping nearby companies from continuing to pollute the water. But deep down on the riverbed lies a deadly time bomb.
With Superfund, the concern is really about contamination that's still making its way into the waterways.
Cleaning up the creek will take centuries, but the committed work of people like Willis offers hope that it will eventually get done.
So you'll see these things sticking in the water. Down on the water line here, this is a project we did about a year ago, and it's a way to try to experiment and see if we can create habitat. So what this is really designated for is for rib mussels. So by creating all these different surfaces using old oyster and clam shells and concrete, we're hoping that we'll see rib mussels colonize those spots.
The experiment to grow mussels along the breakwall was successful. Studies have confirmed that the water quality is measurably better where ribbed mussels are thriving. A single ribbed mussel can clean up to 15 gallons of water per day. The question is, can plants also help to revitalize the water? To find out, Willis and his team are running an important test.
These grasses are removing nutrients that create things like algae blooms. You can kind of see the discoloration in the water now. They're also putting oxygen into the water, which is a major issue, especially back here. And it's done incredibly well so far.
Conservation and environmental protection requires perseverance. For almost 25 years, the Newtown Creek Alliance has worked tirelessly to bring nature back to the creek.
There's 6, wow. There's another 7, 8, this is amazing. You know, they're here because there's fish here. They're catching small fish, shrimp, maybe crabs, picking them out from the water. So that's a really 10 night herons in one spot is pretty amazing.
The Alliance's work depends on donations and people's participation. The Alliance's headquarters has a green roof. Working here is Lisa Bloodgood, the Newtown Creek Alliance Director of Advocacy and Education. Her goal is to fundamentally change this industrial area.
To have something like this in this area is really quite profound. We are completely surrounded by some of the heaviest industrial activities in all of New York City. Not a tree in sight, barely a patch of grass. Mostly, if there's anything growing and alive, it's an invasive weed. The function of a green roof is providing habitat, and a meadow like this with these kinds of plants in this area is incredibly valuable for its ecological function.
Volunteers replant empty lots made available by the city and companies in industrial districts. The plants have been carefully selected. They are native plants and a habitat for a wide range of insects. When this colorful butterfly shows up, Lisa and her helpers are especially happy. Its annual journey is impressive, and it is very picky when it comes to food.
So the monarch butterfly is this really special and unique butterfly, not only because it's like so stunningly beautiful, but it makes this incredible migration every year from a very small area in the mountains of Mexico, and they'll fly up into Canada and then return in the fall each year. And the populations are starting to crash. The caterpillars of the monarchs, this is the only food source that they will eat. These are very special plants, milkweed, and so we want to have it here. So when the monarchs are on their migration, when they're stopping, hopefully laying eggs on our Asclepias, so we've got them all over the place. It's because we've lost about 80% of the monarchs. And really, the biggest culprit and reason why is habitat loss. So that's why these plants are so special here. It's because, we're losing them in their natural settings. So we've got to make sure we're planting them as much as possible.
Not far from this industrial landscape on the other side of the East River, in Manhattan, the situation is different. Animals and plants adapt to the urban environment. A close look even reveals birds of prey and the rare mangrove rail. Once again, photographer Francois is on the hunt for a good shot. Every day he wanders the city for hours. He is particularly fascinated by the contrast between city and nature and how nature constantly expands. For years, he has watched a family of red-tailed hawks who live in a park near his apartment.
Since I got hooked up on birds in about 12 years ago, that's what made me get up every morning, get out and be motivated, especially to do more photography. So the contrast, usually it's what actually really drove me to photograph and try to show the contrast and record it and document it.
Francois' work requires strong focus and a quick hand. In addition, he needs to stay calm and work with precision.
In New York City, the most interesting and fascinating thing for me is to nature, basically, and the contrast with the city.
Tompkins Square Park in the East Village is a first-class hunting ground for red-tailed hawks. Not in the least because of New York's ubiquitous rats.
Here in Tompkins Square, which is my home turf somehow, we had some red-tailed hawks that moved in about 10, 11 years ago. At first, it was just like single birds, and then a pair started to establish itself and nested, I think the first time in 2014, nested on the Christodora building, where I was able to photograph it from different angle and even from behind the window where they were nesting. After that, they started nesting in different trees around here.
Francois has watched these birds for years and knows their nesting behavior inside and out. His experience is what allows him to keep finding stunning motifs. This was a successful day. After a long wait, the young hawks hatched, and Francois was there at the right time. Further south, at the nest of the peregrine falcon, the mother bird calls her young.
Now I have to be just very slow. They like to peck at you and they'll grab you with their talons, which are sharp, but they're not developed enough to really hurt you. And normally at this age, approximately 18 to 21 days old.
Before Chris bands the baby falcon, he checks her for illnesses. But everything is okay.
And we have a little measuring device which helps us confirm which size band. There's two different band sizes. These bands are from the Fish and Wildlife Service, which basically has information on it of the number. And Barbara's writing down these band numbers because we have to report these bands to the Federal Bird Banding Lab. Now before I crimp the band, I just make sure that it fits nice and loosely and it's nice and round. You can see here those long toes they have, almost goes the full length, that these birds will have in 3 weeks when they're basically at the same size as their parents, and it doesn't hurt the bird. So now I'm going to put a second band on to be able to observe this bird from a great distance using binoculars or a spotting scope. We've had birds in the New York City area that have survived 20 years with these bands on without interfering. And one of the challenges we have here in New York City is sometimes these birds will get into trouble when they take their first flight, which will be in about 3 weeks for this youngster.
Banding the birds helps in discovering whether the falcons stay in the city. Depending on the wind, sailing to Sheepshead Bay can take a whole day. Of course, there is always the subway, but traveling by boat gives one a real picture of just how much New York is a city surrounded by ocean. Right after tying up in the harbor, the hungry cormorant attracts attention. A glance overboard brings a school of silver fish into view, a herring called Manhattan or bunkerfish. Not suitable for human consumption, for years it was processed into fish meal. But since 2012, the catch has been restricted, with surprising results. Only a few miles offshore, dolphins swim alongside the ship. Paul Ciaswerda is the founder of Gotham Whale. He has set out to document the number of whales in New York and relies on the help of regular people. Citizen scientists is what it is called here.
I began Gotham Whale after I retired from the New York Aquarium. And when we had whales and dolphins in that environment, we have to come out and see them on their own terms. And it's a wonderful experience to see them right here, so close to New York City.
There he is! There he is! 11
Up until recently, the water has not been clean enough to support the fish population. But now the fish are coming back and the whales are coming back to feed on the fish.
That the water is once again clean enough for whales and their prey is the direct result of the Clean Air and Water Act of 1972 that made polluting the waters punishable by law. "50 years later, the return of whales to New York is a testament to it.
There's a fish called menhaden, which is one of the most abundant fish in the ocean. And they are coming here to feed on the plankton that is encouraged by the Hudson River outflow. That brings all these nutrients down. And now the nutrients build up the algae and planktonic base, and the menhaden feed on that.
Helping to improve the water quality is one animal that has been on Earth for more than 250 million years: the oyster. By sailboat, the journey goes back to Brooklyn, along Coney Island, and part of the almost 500 miles of New York shoreline. The question is whether the self-healing power of nature can be used to improve the ecological state of New York. From the harbor through the Buttermilk Channel, the destination is Brooklyn Bridge Park. Today, the old schooner is an oyster restaurant. 100 years ago, New York's harbor was overgrown with oysters that were harvested and exported all over the world. Typhoid bacteria brought into the harbor through the city's sewer system ended this period, and New York oysters became inedible. Today, New York restaurants get their oysters from Long Island and even the West Coast. Oysters are not only gourmet food. They can also clean up to 50 gallons of water per day. For a spectacular environmental project, oyster shells are currently being collected from 80 New York restaurants. Pete Malinowski grew up on an oyster farm. He is one of the Billion Oyster Project's founders. The ferry ride from Manhattan is his daily commute to his workplace. It all started on Governor's Island. Here at the Harbor School, Pete Malinowski and Murray Fisher developed the idea to use 1 billion oysters to clean New York's polluted waters. Most important for that are these mountains of oyster shells. because oysters can only be raised on oyster shells.
These all come from restaurants in New York City, Brooklyn and Queens, but the oysters originate from farms all over the country. So there's, we call them Pacific oysters or Japanese oysters, and these are the most commonly cultured oysters in the world. So it's very important that we allow them to cure for a year out of the water before we introduce them back to the harbor, because we don't want to introduce any organisms or pathogens from those other places into New York Harbor.
These volunteers are thrilled by Peter's idea. They sort the shells and pack them into biodegradable bags that will become part of an oyster reef. The entire preparation is done by hand.
New York Harbor is 200,000 acres, and you can think of it as a 200,000-acre forest that's had all the trees removed. So it's just flat dirt. And what we're trying to do is rebuild the three-dimensional structure of the ecosystem by restoring oyster reefs. By doing that, we return some of those ecosystem services that used to be here. And the oyster reefs filter the water, provide food and habitat for hundreds of other species, stabilize the bottom, and they sort of are the ecosystem.
That the project's home is Governor's Island didn't happen by chance. The island itself is an ecological treasure. From 1775 on, it was used as a military base and closed to civilians. The abandoned quarters are part of the city's history. Uninhabited, the island is one of the last open spaces in New York City, a habitat for a wide range of birds, plants, and insects. In 2010, the Harbor School moved to the island, a specialized high school where the students learn everything from ship engineering to ocean biology. Situated in the middle of the harbor and equipped with docks, the location is perfect for the Billion Oyster Project. Before larvae will be set on the shells, they are pre-bred. Rebecca Ressner, hatchery manager at the Billion Oyster Project, explains how this works.
Right now we're out on our eco dock, which is on Governor's Island right outside our lab. So you can see the building right there. This is one of our many nursery sites. We do a lot of holding here of spat that we want to use for our education team for what we call ORS, Oyster Research Station Project. So that's what is being worked on here. These oysters are going to be bagged, and the education team will bring them to different middle schools around and install them around the harbor. These are little baby oysters here that are set on this clamshell. There's actually one here. Little variety of sizes as well.
Another one? Yeah. This data sheet? Okay.
So you got 6 so far. Right. Oh, and this one. Is this a count here?
Until the oysters reach that stage, they are bred in this laboratory, and for that, they need a very special diet. Algae that Rebecca grows in this laboratory. Nothing is left to chance. Everything follows strict scientific rules.
We can look to see the quality and the health of our algae that we're going to use to feed our oysters. And we can also check the density and see how much food we're actually going to give our oysters.
The quality of the nutrition is essential for the growth of the larvae. The oysters will be fertilized and pre-grown in these tanks. The process is at once scientific and a gamble. An oyster produces between 6 and 8 million eggs. Whether an egg has been fertilized can only be discovered with the help of an electron microscope.
This one is a log.
Once the oysters are big enough, they will be packed in nets.
15.
But this method only works for smaller oyster reefs, so the experts thought of something new.
We actually set up a new system in Red Hook. It's our biggest setting location right now. We're setting gabions, which are these structures that are designed by our our team on the island, we're using storage containers or shipping containers that are retrofitted into tanks. We have 4 of them, each about 8,000 gallons. We're gonna have a barge with a crane pull up and take the whole tank away from our Red Hook setting site.
This is a big day for Pete and his team. The largest oyster reef so far in the history of the Billion Oyster Project, with 15 million oysters, is to be set at the mouth of the Bronx River.
So this is the biggest installation we've done in New York City, and the most oysters we've ever put on at one site. All of our restoration sites are research sites, so we're looking to learn from this installation, understand what works well, what doesn't, and how we can, continue to iterate on our design process to have the best possible outcome for the oysters.
The oyster reefs have already helped to improve water quality and revitalize entire ecosystems. The return of the whales is living proof of that.
We began on board the American Princess in 2011. And that first year we only saw 3 sightings with a total of 5 whales. There were 2 sightings where we saw 2 whales at the same time. So we had a total of 5 whales for the whole season, 2011. Now we're up into the hundreds, 300 whales per season. I think there's been a constant improvement. Advocacy groups along the Hudson River have all worked to bring back clean water.
Soon, oysters will protect the south shore of Staten Island. This picturesque shoreline is extremely vulnerable to hurricanes and floods. Landscape architect Kate Orff wants to change that. The state of New York commissioned a 2-mile-long living breakwater. She and project manager Pippa Brashear remember.
We both lived here through Sandy and experienced this superstorm in our own personal lives. And, there's trauma. There's a lot of trauma. And we were almost 10 years after that.
I mean, it feels so long, but I just remember, coming here after Sandy, talking to people, seeing the photos, and really understanding how scared people were. And it's one thing to just, have flooding in your home. It's another thing to have buildings knocked off their foundation.
In 2012, Superstorm Sandy caused catastrophic damage in New York. Staten Island and the Rockaway Peninsula were particularly affected. People's desperate attempts to protect themselves failed.
Here you can see almost like this temporary, desperate measure of a temporary dune. Building walls does not solve the problem in this thick, 3-dimensional environment that we live in. It just pushes the problem further away and gets it out of sight and out of mind. In fact, it reduces our perception of risk and our ability to cope and adapt.
You can try to build a wall, but sea levels are rising, water's really powerful. You've got to work with it instead of against it.
Kate Orff runs the landscape architecture firm Scape in Manhattan. Together with her team, she developed a complete redesign of Staten Island's South Shore.
Okay, go ahead. And then here at the top of the shoreline, you can see
Living Breakwaters won a federal competition for ideas to better protect New York City from storms and floods. Data about water levels under different conditions was the basis for her concept. In a scaled-down model, wave parameters are being tested under real-life conditions. Instead of a massive concrete structure, The design takes advantage of a modular system. Oyster reefs are an important part of it. Planning for the construction, scheduled for fall 2021, is in high gear.
For each one, throughout.
Concrete, square units to which oysters will be attached are central to the entire project.
This is a scale model of an ecological concrete unit. It's one of these rods that have oysters on it, and they'll just start to grow, and then they'll grow on the units as well. In real life, it'll be about 4 feet by 4 feet and weigh 2.5 tons. This is actually a scale model as part of designing the breakwaters.
And this particular element is just here on the edges at the toe of the slope, so you can kind of see the scale, and then that breakwater is segmented, and it'll be put right out around 400 feet in front of these buoys.
Extreme weather conditions like Hurricane Sandy are becoming more frequent, triggered by climate change and the exploitation of nature for hundreds of years. A journey to the island world of New York raises the hope that a change in thinking can happen. But turning that into meaningful action is a whole other story. Just 10 miles off the North American East Coast, in one of the world's busiest ship lanes, dolphins and whales frolic. The journey's goal is to discover a unique archipelago. The indigenous Lenape lived here in peaceful unity with nature until the arrival of the European colonialists. How has nature changed since then? What has been the impact of climate change and rising sea levels? A journey by boat takes us into this unknown island world hiding in plain sight with its tremendous natural wealth. The Verrazano Bridge marks the entry into a natural harbor that made it one of the most important marketplaces in the world. The bridge was named after the Italian seafarer Giovanni Verrazzano, who arrived here 500 years ago. Once the ships pass the bridge's 228-foot clearance, a panoramic view opens up onto New York, a city built on islands and surrounded by water. A southwest wind is prevalent during the summer in New York, ideal for a few hours' sail to an inner-city nature preserve. Sailing through open waters, the journey ends in an inlet between Brooklyn and Queens, Jamaica Bay. Because the shape of Long Island reminded the Lenape people of a whale, they called Jamaica Bay the mouth of the whale. A mere 10 miles from Times Square as the crow flies, This wildlife sanctuary is home to more than 300 bird species. The biotope is even reachable from Manhattan by subway. Over the last 30 years, the marshland has been restored and is now habitat to a wide range of flora and fauna. But the picturesque image is deceiving. Today, Jamaica Bay suffers from the environmental neglect of the past. Up until 50 years ago, most of New York City's garbage was dumped into the sea only a few miles offshore. The consequences are still visible at the shoreline of Dead Horse Bay. Urban archaeologists collect the remains of recent history. Classic glass jars are in particular demand. This view is worth more than money. In this simple house on the water's edge lives a man who is connected to this place like no one else. Every morning, laughing gulls wait for a Don Reapy to feed them with little fish. Don is the bird whisperer of Jamaica Bay. The octogenarian has spent his whole life with birds. Some of them he gave names, like these two, Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde. Don lives on Broad Channel Island in Jamaica Bay. His house is filled with tchotchkes, including a great white shark, like the one in Spielberg's film Jaws, inspired by the sharks off Long Island. Don's office is also his living room, and from time to time he shares it with a white egret.
This is my buddy of many years, Edgar. He's been coming for about 8 years. And he'll come right around April 1st, he shows up. And then the end of October, he heads south. I don't know where he goes. I'd love to find out where he goes in the winter. But he comes to visit me almost every day. And he'll just walk right in the house. Hello, Edgar. Come on in. Come over here, you. And I know this bird because on his right foot, see the left toe is part missing. He's got a little club on it. You cannot touch that bird. If you go that way, he goes that way. That way. He's always got an out. You know, he doesn't like it if you get between him and the door. These birds were hunted almost to extinction in the 1880s, 90s. For women's hats, they wanted those egrets. Here's a good one, little one. You don't want that one? No? How about this one? There you go. Totally spoiled. He wants just a certain size. He's very particular. So, we did think about, we don't need to band him because we can tell who he is by his club toe. But we did think of putting a little GPS tag on him so we could track him. I want to see where he goes in the forage in the bay. It's important for us to know, make sure he's not going over to the airport or he's getting into trouble, and to get a sense of where they forage, the best areas to get the fish, and then find out where he goes in the wintertime, to see how far south he goes, and maybe go down there and see if I can find him. He's probably on a place where there's other people around too. That would be interesting. Here you go. All right, feeding time's over.
For Don, his work is a calling. Ever since the state of New York made him Jamaica Bay Guardian, it has been his mission to maintain the biological balance of the more than 20 square mile area.
This is my workstation. In the summertime, we have students, ages 16, say 21, and we're able to get funding to hire them for 8 weeks. We paid them $15 an hour, which is good for summer work. And we take them out in the bay. We do marsh plantings, shoreline cleanups, community projects. It's outdoors. We sometimes take them to the museum for a day. So part of it is educational as well. And give them a little kind of jobs training to see if they want to be in this field. And many do go on to college, and we hear from them later on.
Something Edgar might benefit from. The JFK airport is visible on the horizon, and Manhattan's skyline dominates the other direction. On the Rockaway Bay side is an old New York neighborhood where nature is becoming more and more important. For Lauren Cosgrove, Rockaway is a home. She is one of the many volunteers who dedicate their time to this place.
I really found myself here. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn. My whole family's from the city, but I never really felt at home. You know, I need to feel nature, be able to touch it and see it and smell it, and get away and breathe fresh air. So this is home. You know, you don't really get that when you live in a rural area or a coastline that's far away from a city.
Lauren has a resolute voice and strong opinions. She knows how to motivate people.
I thrive off of people, but I also need nature. And this is like the perfect place for me.
Every tide brings tons of garbage and debris to the marsh. The residents here need to clean it up regularly if they want to keep nature from being submerged in trash.
Today we're going to clean up Dubois Point. It's totally choking in plastic pollution, and I'm really glad that we're going to be able to join all of our friends to clean up this important marshland in Jamaica Bay.
The marsh is the lifeline of the bay. It is a habitat for animals, stores carbon, and helps to slow down climate change. In coastal areas, a marsh absorbs water like a sponge. That's why people here care about the marsh. It protects their houses and their home. Don doesn't just organize the work here. More importantly, he inspires people. His engagement is based on the conviction that continuity and perseverance will ultimately result in change. The endless labor that will bring the fruits takes a lot of energy.
I've had fun all my life. I'm one of the few people that managed to work at a job I liked. And every day to me was something I enjoyed. And here we have some of our barn owl boxes, tree swallow box. This is a big post for erecting the owl boxes. And we put these out in the remote islands of the bay. So this is one of our major projects. It's called the raptor management. And we have about 5 nesting pair of barn owls in the bay, which is pretty dense for this area. So that's a good population.
Barn owls can be found all around the world. These islands, with their wealth of food, would make an ideal habitat if there were barns, because barns are their nesting place. To make these islands habitable for them, Don and his helpers put up nesting boxes. More than a dozen islands can be found in Jamaica Bay, some of them submerged every 6 hours by the tide. Herons, ducks, and the protected osprey nest here. Only Don and the volunteers are allowed to step on these islands.
We're on one of the big upland islands in the middle of Jamaica Bay. These are the strongholds of the barn owl, because the owls seem to like to be, if I can make believe I'm an owl, I'm looking around. Oh, this looks a nice spot, a little shade over here, a little protection against the strong southwest winds. They like to be tucked in like that, somewhat hidden. So nobody can get out here, nobody comes out here. The only issue with this island is there's raccoons on it. So that's why we have that predator guard up there on it. We're almost there. We're going, we're going. A little more. That's it. We've been very successful with these boxes because there's no big trees with big cavities in it, which in nature they would use. And they're called barn owls because they're like barns too, where they can get in an old barn that's broken, they get a broken window in there. But here, out here, we don't have that. So that's a nest box. So it plants that type of habitat.
For seafowl in particular, Jamaica Bay is an important habitat in close proximity to the city. The question is whether they can also find a habitat in the urban jungle. The Jacob Javits Center in Manhattan is New York's largest convention hall. Inside its glass architecture, the building accommodates international trade shows and conferences and events. None of that can be detected on its nearly 300,000 square foot roof. The green roof is a man-made oasis that also serves scientific research. Dustin Partridge is an ecologist who works for New York City's renowned Audubon Society, one of the oldest conservation organizations in the U.S. For Dustin, New York's roofs have great ecological potential. He created a bird sanctuary here, and it all starts out with plants.
Urban conservation is quite important, but a common issue is that there isn't that much green space available. But one thing that's now being considered is the rooftop space. So there are a lot of rooftops in Manhattan and New York City that are just unused. And what you can make is this. You're on a green roof. So this was built in 2014 as part of the retrofit. And as you can see, it's flourishing since then. The layers on a green roof do change, but this roof is here just because of that. That's all it is. And this is the layer of growing media. It's very shallow. And there's some insulation down below. There's a substrate in here to keep the soil on the roof and hold on to some water. Oh, we have a bunch of ants down there too. But yeah, I mean, this is all it takes to provide this wildlife habitat that you're looking at. So it's not much, and you can really make a difference.
These ants found their way to the roof by themselves, a clear sign that this is a healthy biotope.
We have these motion sensor cameras. When something passes in front of it, it triggers and it takes a set of photos.
This motion-triggered camera, as well as a second one mounted slightly higher, takes pictures over a long course of time and offers important information to scientists about the diversity of the birds attracted to the roof.
We have that bat recording unit out there, and one of the things that we noticed on that bat recording unit, the microphone stand, but also on other green roofs around New York City, is that when you put a perch out, birds are going to use it. So we wanted to take advantage of that, and because we can't be here monitoring all the time, and this allows us to get photographs of the more cryptic bird species that might be up here. And we set this out, and it's set out to record all year. And it's been really great at getting photos of a lot of the migratory birds that are here, that are just here for a few days before they move on. And we actually had some great photos right here, because it's always amazing to see a new bird species using green roofs in New York City. It's like the American kestrels. But then we have those migratory birds that are moving through. We have a lot of flycatchers that are up here that are always getting picked up by the camera traps, but really usually found in kind of the deep woods. And it's neat that it will use this roof during migration.
Without green space, no insects. And without insects, no birds. That's how ecosystems work.
And it does take some time. It takes money and effort. But as you can see, is it provides some really good wildlife habitat. So you have birds up here. You have nesting herring gulls. We have migratory birds. We have bats. We have a lot of different arthropods that are using it. And once this was built, it sort of became this wildlife habitat that's held up and that's continued. As the city changes around it, this has been a spot that's been really great for conservation.
One bird species that comes to the green roof every spring is the herring gull. For them, it is the most important nesting place in Manhattan. Wherever they find a healthy habitat, they use it for nesting.
What we have here is a herring gull nest, and it's a bit too hot today to spend too much time here, so let's get out of here.
New York has roughly 944 billion square feet of roofs, almost 50 times the size of Central Park. To turn those into green spaces would fundamentally change the ecological state of the city. Swiss-born nature photographer Francois Portman is on a constant hunt for spectacular images. For him, the key is to be at the right time at the right place. Today, he's looking for a very special bird, the American woodcock. Francois knows there is only one place in New York where he can count on finding them: Bryant Park at 42nd Street. After a while, he spots one. His patience pays off, and he gets his picture. Some animals are impossible to get in front of a camera lens. Bats, for instance. But Caitlin Parkins from New York City Audubon knows where to find them.
So this is kilohertz, this is frequency on the y-axis, and then milliseconds on the x-axis. And so these pulses are happening in like tiny, tiny increments of time, extremely, extremely fast. So this, I can tell, is an eastern red bat. This is a really beautiful call. There's not a lot of background noise, and we know that there's a bat in this call because it's this backwards J-shaped call. And you can see over here, it's more distant from the microphone, and it's getting closer, closer. It's passing by the microphone here and then going off into the distance over there. We don't know the number of bats because if you can imagine, you've got a microphone, you could have one bat flying around your microphone foraging all night or 40 bats passing by, and you can't tell the difference between those two things. So what we calculate is bat activity, or the number of bat passes per night. So we have quite a few. We have maybe 6 or 7 years of data on bats over the Javits roof right now. So we know that bat activity increased as the roof matured, and now it's sort of leveled off, at least probably in the last year or so. So as the roof matured, as the sedum matured, as insects made their homes there, the bat activity on the roof increased because it's good foraging habitat.
The bats Caitlin watches also live on the green roof of the Javits Center. She installed a special monitoring device that records the calls of the animals inaudible to the human ear. Several times a week, she visits the roof to pick up the data cards and to check on how the herring gulls are doing.
Hey, Francine. Hey, how are you? Good. So
What's going on here? I haven't been up in a while, but how many nests do we have total?
We have about 187.
It's a lot of nests. Cool. Do you know how many, what percentage of the nests have hatched right now?
I want to say maybe 40%.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Herring gulls nest between 45 and 50 days. It takes around 30 days until the chicks hatch. A few days afterwards, they start to explore their surroundings. A dangerous endeavor, because if they get too close to another nest, the nesting gull might attack them. To avoid that, the parent bird makes sure the chicks don't venture too far.
Is there a nest at the bat detector?
Literally right behind.
Right behind it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna go change the bat detector batteries real quick. I'm gonna try to be really fast because it looks like there are chicks right next to it. Technology makes it so much easier because traditionally we would study bats by catching them in mist nets or going into caves and counting them. But you can imagine it's really hard. It stresses out the animals. We might catch 1 or 2 bats in a night. And so technology allows us to instead record their echolocation calls, and it makes it so much easier to study them. Though I will say that we can get some information from their echolocation calls, but we can't identify individual bats through their echolocation calls. We can't handle the bats or measure them or take DNA from them. So there are limitations, but being able to record bats gives us sort of a window into the species that we'd otherwise never have.
Caitlin and Francine study the nests closely. It gives them valuable information about the animal's behavior. The birds use urban materials for their nests, often the trash that people carelessly throw away.
So this is a nest that actually, one of the nests that we measured that has trash in it. I think it was about 30% coverage. So as you can see here, there's foil, there's a bottle cap.
This tab that goes on
there's
the
wood there, there's wrapper, candy wrappers, insulation.
And then this is foam.
Yeah, so there's foam, a lot of insulation. You can see another one here. And this is an example of nests with trash that we're researching. If it changes their behavior, if they're laying more eggs or less eggs. As you can see, there's only 1 egg here.
The Javits Center roof is home to more than 180 herring gull pairs. Some chicks will stay here, others will leave town. To keep count, Caitlin will band the chicks when they are a little older. No matter where they will travel, they are already real New Yorkers. Individualists with their own ideas, and not easy to catch. The next day it rains hard in New York City. Perfect weather for Dustin Partridge to study the insects on the roof, because the variety of the arthropods has a direct effect on which birds and bats will come here. To find out which insects frequent the roof, he puts up water traps.
What you'll see over the year as the roof starts to wake up, you'll see some more flowers coming out. You'll see also with that a lot of different arthropods. But then you also see the spiders that have been colonizing the roof over time. And then you have some flies, which are typical of the spring. Our research is showing that green roofs are wildlife habitat. And depending on what you want to create that wildlife habitat for, you can design the roof in certain ways to attract either certain types of birds or bats or insects.
Dustin examines his find under the microscope. It will help him to determine which birds will be attracted to the roof. The samples were prepared in a lab and preserved in alcohol for the examination.
We're looking at all these arthropods, which are fascinating on their own. But what's important here is that they're kind of the basis of the system out there. So yes, they're insects. Most people don't really appreciate them, but they're a food source for everything else that's out there.
The analytical data will give Dustin specific information on whether or not to adjust the vegetation of the roof. There aren't many docking spaces for sailboats in Manhattan. However, even in this large industrial harbor, one can find a spectacular anchorage that hardly anyone knows about. Like here, right behind the Statue of Liberty. With the first sliver of sunlight at the horizon, Francois Portman gets ready in his studio for an exciting day in Jamaica Bay. Today, he will look for osprey, and for that he needs the right equipment. Most of all, a very long lens. What takes several hours by sailboat takes Francois just one. He rides the subway, and because it runs 24/7, Francois can get to almost all the nature preserves in New York at any time, day and night. The A-Line is the only New York subway that runs on a small track right above the waterline from Brooklyn to Broad Channel Island. During his ride, the photographer is already looking for shots. In his mind, he is with the ospreys he will photograph today. From Broad Channel Island, it is only a short walk to the nature preserve that combines a variety of biotopes. At the Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, part of a national park, wetlands and a forest are adjacent to each other. Sometimes, Francois is lucky and spies a snake in the dense underbrush, an unexpected shot that he admires. The harmless garter snake is native to New York, but difficult to find.
The problem is now it's getting warmer and they're full of energy, so they just flee.
Snakes are cold-blooded animals, and their mobility depends on the air temperature.
For example, I was here a week ago. It was a freezing day, but it was sunny. They were out to catch the sun, but they had no energy, so you could approach them pretty close. I was able actually to film them.
The coastal terrain on the other side is a true bird paradise. The tree swallow is just one of the many native birds here. These birdhouses are very popular. They're hardly set up before the swallows begin to compete with each other for a spot. Suddenly, Francois hears the call of an osprey. But the angle is not good. Just a few yards further away, he finds the perfect spot.
Now the male is just left, and he's probably going to come back to the nest with some nesting material.
Indeed, the male returns, but without any nesting material. Every year in May, the osprey return from the south to Jamaica Bay, and year after year they brood in the same nest. For today, Francois got his top shot.
It takes a lot to get a good photo of any birds, basically, because they are birds that keep moving all the time. And now, every day, as we're moving into the season, we're getting more foliage, and it's going to be harder and harder with the light, and harder to actually see them.
Nevertheless, Francois keeps looking, even though he doesn't expect another top shot. Just looking at the skyline of Manhattan still fascinates him. Don Reapy is on his way to Jamaica Bay. His destination is the nesting ground of a mythical black bird. In Homer's Odyssey, Ulysses was rescued by a nymph who transformed into this kind of bird. Around the small island, the water is so shallow that Don can't approach it with his motorboat. For the last few yards, he uses a kayak. Even for Don, this kind of inspection remains fascinating. It is proof that his work is meaningful.
Look at all these cormorants. Incredible. And they nest on these islands. And the reason they all choose these islands is because the predators can't get here. As far as I know, there are no raccoons on this island. Once raccoons get to the island, forget about it. They leave.
Cormorants are seabirds whose wings span up to 4 feet. They are excellent at catching fish, and in some Asian countries are trained by humans for fishing. The female bird lays 2 to 3 eggs to be brooded for 23 to 25 days. In In New York, they show up wherever there is enough food. A cormorant colony like this is an indication that the fish population in Jamaica Bay is abundant and healthy. Even so, not all the young cormorants will survive. The chicks hatch in irregular periods, and the younger ones often fail in the fight with their siblings for food. The Rockaway Peninsula borders Jamaica Bay. Lauren Cosgrove is on her way to the beach.
My favorite view of Jamaica Bay right here. This is the Marine Parkway Bridge. At sunset, you get the most gorgeous vistas.
The south shore of Rockaway, with about 6 miles of beach, faces the Atlantic. The oyster catcher can determine with his orange-red beak whether a mussel contains food or is just an empty shell. He shares the beach with a bird on the endangered species red list, the piping plover.
They nest in these dunes. We take up so much territory when we go to the beach, they don't have any space to lay their eggs. That's why they're so endangered. And they're really, really small.
The cute piping plover prefers sandy and rocky territory for its habitat, and beaches like this. The well-camouflaged birds can hardly be spotted. The sad consequence is that many are trampled to death. Even very careful people need to be extra careful, because when threatened, the chicks instinctively feign death.
They'll be up through the summer, maybe first week of August. That's their prime time for when they're nesting out here. And around September, that's when they all take a vacation and fly to sunny Florida.
The greatest danger they face is the loss of their habitat. The American beach grass not only offers them protection, but also helps to prevent erosion. Along North America's east coast, rising sea levels are flooding the shoreline and washing away beaches.
This is American beach grass. This is the only thing that survives out here. This grass is delicate, but so strong. Its roots, it fortifies the dunes. It prevents all the erosion. They start off as seedlings, and we plant them when they're a little bit smaller than this.
Every year, tons of sand are washed into the ocean. Since 1930, the beach has been completely replenished 37 times. Here too, nature could help.
These are the roots I was talking about. Roots of the American beach grass. They're stretching, they're looking for the dune. So you can see how all the erosion is leaving just the grass bare. These roots are sticking out because the ocean is pounding these dunes day after day. It's wiping away all the sand. This is a perfect example of all the erosion that happens. It's carved out all the way through the boardwalk. These roots are the last hope, the only thing holding it together. You can feel how they stick into the sand. They're almost spiky.
Once a year, Caitlin Parkins and Dottie Workmeister take a journey back in time. They are looking for animals that had lived on this planet for almost 300 million years.
Look, somebody smashed her. Such a shame.
Every May and June at full moon, horseshoe crabs conquer the shoreline of Jamaica Bay to mate. These animals live exclusively on the east coast of America and in parts of Asia.
This is an egg cluster. Freshly hatched horseshoe crabs here at the end of the season, so in late June, these would hatch. But when you see sandpipers and red knots pecking at the sand in places where horseshoe crabs are spawning, this is often what they're eating.
A perfect example of the symbiosis between two very different animal species. Caitlin and Dottie monitor the horseshoe crabs for the New York City Audubon Society. They record how the number of animals changes over the years and how far they travel. The mating time only starts at full moon, but a few early birds are already here.
You can call it like a boxing glove or
like a clasper.
Yeah, this is what he holds on to the female with.
His shell has also got a little bit of a dent in it, so he can kind of pull right onto her. He's going to take those claspers and grab onto the back of her shell here, and he's conformed right to her shell. And we're going to measure him with our caliber, right about by the eyes here, which is the widest part of the carapace. So Caitlin's writing down that we have a male, and it's 19 centimeters right on the head. And now we have our tags that are already pre-numbered on the sheet. So we're going to have 459076. We're going to do this with the drill. We have a cork on here, not because we drank the wine before we came, just to make sure that it doesn't go all the way through him. So we're going to come right down, pick a spot right about here, and I'm just going to hit it real quick.
She puts her thumb over to keep any blood from coming out. And pop it in. There he is.
And then we'll just return him back to the water.
459076.
The animals are measured and marked in order to observe their movements.
So in order to identify individuals, we have to put tags on them. And when you have an individual that's tagged and you record data about it when it was tagged and released, the next time that animal is seen, you can get data on where it's been and get an idea of the life history of these animals.
It makes a little tiny hole, which you can just about see, and this is like a little screw that's going to go in there. And let him go. Oh my God, it's so sandy.
As soon as it is dark and the moon is risen, a fascinating nature show begins. With the rising tide, a huge number of horseshoe crabs arrive on the beach. The animals even play an essential part in the development of modern medicine.
Horseshoe crabs have blue blood that is very valuable, and it's used to test medical devices and implants and vaccines for contamination.
In pharmaceutical labs, a fifth of the animal's blood is harvested before they are released back into nature. But thousands of animals do not survive that procedure.
Right after that point there, it's going to be full.
I was just curious if we walk down there, what will...
Yeah. There's a couple of crabs stuck on it.
Oh, stuck on it?
Like they got trapped in between.
As the moon rises, more and more animals arrive.
We try our best not to disturb the crabs while we're doing this whole process. So we don't dig up females that are dug in, and we don't separate males and females that are clasped together. So this is a really good example of a horseshoe crab that is flipped over, and it's trying to right itself by bending at the hinge and sort of using its telson. And it's unfortunate it's also stuck on a beer bottle.
This is a female, and an easy way to tell is the two front claws right here. On the male, they're claspers. They kind of look like boxing gloves, and that's what he uses to hold on to the female. Hers are just straight like the rest of them. Now what we do is we look for tags so that we can find out where they were tagged and where they've been seen. Look, you can see the tags. Look at the tag.
I know that this crab was originally tagged in 2019 in Dead Horse Bay, which means it was tagged 2 years ago in Jamaica Bay. So whatever it was doing in those 2 years, it came back to another beach in Jamaica Bay to spawn again this year. It's really cool.
In mating, the smaller male animals move in the water over the female. Then they crawl together to land, where the female will lay her eggs. On the way to the beach, they leave these very typical traces. After more than 300 million years on this planet, horseshoe crabs are now on the list of near-threatened species. Throughout the years, they were captured and their shells were crushed and processed into fertilizer. They were used by fishermen as bait and bled for medical research. What is more important, a short-term advantage for humans, or to protect them from vanishing from the earth? New York has made a decision. At least in this bay, they must no longer be captured. Just 10 miles off the North American East Coast, in one of the world's busiest ship lanes, dolphins and whales frolic. The journey's goal is to discover a unique archipelago. The indigenous Lenape lived here in peaceful unity with nature until the arrival of the European colonialists. How has nature changed since then? What has been the impact of climate change and rising sea levels? A journey by boat takes us into this unknown island world hiding in plain sight with its tremendous natural wealth. The Verrazano Bridge marks the entry into a natural harbor that made it one of the most important marketplaces in the world. The bridge was named after the Italian seafarer Giovanni Verrazzano, who arrived here 500 years ago. Once the ships pass the bridge's 228-foot clearance, a panoramic view opens up onto New York, a city built on islands and surrounded by water. Two sea routes lead to the city, one coming from the south along the Atlantic into the New York Harbor, the other from the northeast along the so-called Pirate Route through the Long Island Sound. In the 17th century, pirates would circumvent the forts protecting the harbor by sailing through the Long Island Sound and the East River into the city. On the way, in the middle of a small archipelago on its own off Pelham Bay in New York's Bronx, lies New York's most maritime island, City Island, known for shipbuilding and sailmaking. Right across is Hart Island. More than 1 million souls without family or too poor for a decent burial have their last resting place here. The privately owned Rat Island belongs to a Swiss man who flies his flag in the wind. Pelham Bay, 3 times the size of Central Park, is New York's largest park. Mixed forest, marshland, and 15 miles of shoreline combine to form a unique biotope. Adriana Caminero is a park ranger here and knows every nook and cranny of this area.
This area presents a very unique ecosystem. You know, we have the convergence of many different kinds of ecosystem. You have the salt marsh, which is kind of out there. Out here, this is the Long Island Sound. It's more of a rocky coast environment. And then you have the woodlands and the forests. So here we have plenty of wildlife, all New York native species.
Only 400 years earlier, black bears, wolves, and cougars would hunt prey, and beavers would build dams. Today, a large number of deer, raccoon, and even coyote roam through the underbrush. Birds like the rose-breasted grosbeak, dark-eyed junco, and many others live here. Nearby, wading birds inhabit the marsh and the coastal shore. These trees were already here when the first Europeans came ashore. In 1960, the century-old trees were almost cut down for a landfill the city wanted to open here. But New Yorkers objected and finally stopped the plan, and Pelham Bay became a nature preserve.
There's a rich and storied history here in Pelham Bay Park. There were indigenous people who lived here as early as 1000 AD, and those were the Siwanoy people, which were Native Americans in this area who lived from here up around the Long Island Sound, parts of Connecticut. And they lived here. They used, some of the glacial erratics, these large boulders, were meeting areas for ceremonies and diplomatic things like that. And of course, when the English settlers came, it created conflict. You had the Dutch settlers, the English settlers, as well as the Siwanoy people here.
Since the Siwanoy lived here, New York has lost 85% of its wetlands. Marshland not only protects the city during floods, it also stores carbon dioxide. However, in times of rising sea levels, the danger is that the soil will be washed away and the grass will die, releasing the captured CO2. This is what might happen in Pelham Bay. Ellen Hartig from New York City Parks and Nicole Mayer from the Nature Conservancy want to prevent that by all means possible. Their goal is to restore most of New York's marshland in the next 30 years. For that, they need to know what can prevent the soil from being washed away. For the last 10 years, Ellen has regularly recorded whether the marsh erodes or grows.
She's going to put 9 fiberglass rods through 9 numbered holes on that bubble-leveled arm, and then lower them each to just to the surface of the marsh. Number 1. Here's number 1. Any difference in the height of the pins that remains above the marsh?
For this, she uses a so-called sedimentation erosion table.
Every marsh needed a slow sea level rise to develop, so since the last ice age. But now with accelerated sea level rise, we're concerned it's beginning to lose in elevation. And these measurements will allow us to keep track.
Ready for pin 1 when you are.
Great. And this is SCT number 2, and the compass reading is 100 degrees.
15.4.
And number 9, the last one, is 15.6.
15.6, got it.
But we're also concerned about below ground processes. And there, Nicole's cores are invaluable because they're showing us and allows us to see what's happening to the root structure.
So on that first day, 7.5 years ago, the surface of the marsh was at the bottom of this white feldspar layer. And today, 7.5 years later, the surface of the marsh is 20 millimeters higher since that time when Ellen put the feldspar clay on the surface of the marsh.
For that to happen, the grass has to be healthy. To ensure that, the amount of pollutants has to be reduced.
We have this really fantastic natural experiment where we're going to be turning off the nitrogen pollution source that's been polluting for decades. Will they start growing in a way, if we give them the clean water that they need, that they are able to keep their head above water and keep pace with sea level rise?
The marsh and the shoreline are an important habitat for herons and cormorants. Of all the 19 heron species that exist in North America, 13 can be found in New York. The great egret is a common sight here. Relatively rare is the yellow-crowned night heron, which lives on the Rockaway Peninsula. The islands close to Manhattan are a safe habitat for herons and cormorants, the most common waterfowl in the metropolitan area. South and North Brother Island in the East River, right across from the Rikers Island prison, are the most important breeding grounds. Every year, the New York City Audubon visits the island to conduct the New York Harbor Herons Nesting Survey. Captain John shuttles the group under Todd Winston's leadership to the islands.
From here, the island doesn't look that big. It doesn't look as though it could be difficult to navigate. But once you're on there, it's very difficult to tell where you are sometimes.
Everybody is helping Todd record the heron stock.
Novum, I'm gonna give you guys a couple data books, but I'll wait till the whole group is here together. All right.
The objective is to count the nests and to assess the colony's breeding activity. Barely have they stepped on the beach when they discover herring gull eggs. Gulls are ground-breeding birds. Herons build their nests in trees.
We survey about 18 islands across the whole New York, New Jersey harbor. And, the birds nest on about, recently on maybe 9 of those islands, I think. All but one of the islands are completely wild. They're protected islands. They're this wilderness in the middle of New York City that many people that have lived here their whole lives don't even know exist.
Todd carefully approaches the nests. Even in the underbrush, gull chicks are hiding. Just hatched and well camouflaged, they can be easily overlooked.
We are always vigilant to make sure that people understand how important these islands are to wildlife. And we ourselves come on the island, if possible, just once each year, and we try to go in and get out quickly to avoid disturbing the birds too much, because otherwise they may abandon.
North Brother is an abandoned island located in the East River. Chris Nagy is a biologist and loves coyotes. He wants to find out if there are any on this island.
Nobody put coyotes in New York City. They came on their own, and we're just having to deal with it. Well, we don't know if they're on this island, but it makes the most sense.
The densely overgrown island is the perfect habitat for coyotes. They often hide in the underbrush and are rarely spotted by humans. Getting on to North Brother Island is strictly prohibited. Only scientists like Chris are allowed to be there from time to time.
This time of year, we'd had those sightings from actually guards at Rikers that would tell us, I think I see 2 coyotes on one of the islands. And so when you get 2 together, you may think there's a den, and that's sort of what we're really looking for.
People have been isolated on North Brother Island for decades, the most famous of them being the chef, Mary Mullen, better known as Typhoid Mary, who carried the typhoid virus but didn't show any symptoms. A large number of people she infected died, and when she refused to stop working, she was quarantined here for more than 30 years. Chris installed motion-triggered cameras here. Now he wants to find out what they recorded.
Oh, card's still here. Data's good. So that'll have a couple thousand pictures of animals and probably some people as well. Individual coyotes can travel large distances and they show up randomly, and in New York, someone's going to see them.
Coyotes are excellent swimmers and could travel effortlessly to and from Manhattan, only a few hundred yards away. Chris is curious to find out if there are actually coyotes on North Brother Island. Unfortunately, his cameras don't catch any. He assumes people illegally visiting the island chase them off. North of Coney Island lie Hoffman and Swinburne Island. Todd and his team want to examine the nests and the breeding of the cormorant colony there. Swinburne is located just 10 miles south of Manhattan in the Lower Bay, just behind the Verrazano Bridge. There is no dock, and it is quite challenging to get onto the island. Hundreds of birds take over the island from the end of April to the end of October. Then they move south to Florida, or even to the Caribbean. The most common cormorant is the double-crested cormorant. They lead a monogamous life, and the couples stay together for years. Todd and his team try to record all the nests.
Is it inactive, or you think it's...
It looks like it was active, so I guess...
Yeah, so 0. Yeah, great.
This is more than just keeping account of the bird population. Because in nature, everything is connected.
Hey, Emil. It's definitely true that the health of the environment, the level of pollution in the environment is connected to the bird's health, and it's connected to human health. It's all one thing. And the more you work in ecology, you realize that it's all connected, that the health of all the creatures that we see, including human beings, is connected. So any connection that we see between environmental contaminants and pollution with our bird's health also ultimately affects our health. Of course it does. And that's the case with all sorts of pollution, not just chemical pollution, but plastic pollution, which is such a huge problem across the world. It affects everybody in the long run, plants, animals, and people.
A realization that in the face of these naked and vulnerable creatures is an urgent call for responsible action. Swinburne Island was built in 1873 as an immigration post outside New York's harbor. European immigrants had to wait at quarantine hospitals before being allowed into the country. Today, the ruins of the hospital are the only hint of that past. From Swinburne Island, the journey continues passing the Verrazano Bridge back to Manhattan. Just like the migrating birds, every year returning from the south to the city. In spite of the skyscrapers, Manhattan is a real magnet for migrating birds. It is one of the most important landing spots on the so-called American Flyway, from Greenland to Latin America. Central Park is a real paradise for ornithologists. They are fascinated by the starling species, for instance, even though they are not native to the U.S. In 1890, a Shakespeare fan released more than 100 of these birds in Central Park with the idea to settle in the park every bird mentioned in the British poet's plays, a personal passion that caused tremendous harm. The population of the European starling has since grown to more than 200 million across the U.S., causing more than $1 billion a year in damage to U.S. agriculture. Aurora Crooks belongs to a young generation of bird lovers. She knows she can find more than 200 bird species in Central Park. For example, the magnolia warbler, or the American goldfinch. The Baltimore oriole, and the blue jay, which besides seeds also feeds on insects.
It's about connecting with the community at large. I think it's really easy when you live in a huge city like New York to feel very, very atomized from nature or separate from nature. And I think birding kind of reminds me of the fact that everything is incredibly connected, and it just connects me to all of my senses and the fact that, you know, we're a community of people and animals working together.
This is why every day hundreds of bird lovers come to Central Park. But a metropolis like New York City also poses a deadly danger to birds. Modern glass architecture and the building's reflective facades confuse them. The birds crash into the windows and die. Every day, Aurora and many volunteers roam the city in search of victims of these structures.
It's hard to make the number of how many birds exactly are killed in New York. If one palm warbler here dies and I see it, and we can imagine, let's say 50 birds die per day per building. And if you multiply that by every building in New York City, and there's thousands of buildings in New York City, so many high rises, and you multiply that, you can say that there's thousands, at least 1,000, maybe more per day in collisions, and that's just a rough estimate.
But there is a solution: bird-safe glass.
In late 2019, Introduction 1482 was introduced to New York City's council and was passed, which meant that starting in 2020, all new buildings in New York had to have bird-friendly glass as they were constructing the buildings.
A blessing for the birds. Now bird lovers are trying to convince the owners of existing buildings to retrofit their structures with bird-safe glass. A simple pattern is printed onto the surface that birds can recognize, but which is invisible to the human eye. The initiative is organized by Caitlin Parkins. At the headquarters of the New York City Audubon Society, all data about the city's bird casualties is collected and analyzed. Aurora, too, brings her sad finding to the office. During spring and fall migration, native bird species are common victims of the windows.
Hey, I found a bird on my route today.
Hey, what route were you on?
I was on the downtown east route.
Just one?
Just one. So here is that.
One more for the pile from today.
And here's the down to sheet.
These are all collision victims. Each and every one of these birds ran into a pane of glass and died upon impact or shortly thereafter. In New York City, we estimate between 90 and 230,000 birds die every year. So nearly 1 billion birds die from collisions with glass in the US every year. So birds don't see glass as a solid barrier. Neither do people. It's made to be clear or see-through. But we use context cues to realize where glass is or should be, and birds don't know how to do that. So a bird might see a tree reflected in glass and think that it's a real tree and try to fly through it, or they might see something behind glass that they want to get to and they don't realize there's a solid barrier in the way. And birds fly very fast and very directly. And so the vast majority of these birds will strike that glass and die from impact or die from hemorrhaging or bleeding or inflammation later. And from an urban glow level, birds are just attracted into cities because of the light pollution. And of course, when they're attracted into the cities, they land in areas that maybe aren't great habitat for them, and they land in areas that are surrounded by glass buildings. So when they wake up the next morning and they're going out to forage, they're surrounded by this maze of glass. And that's when the majority of collisions occur, is in the early morning hours.
Light usually provides orientation, but at night, the birds are often doomed. Every year, a shining memorial has catastrophic consequences for birds. The bright light beams shot into the night sky to remember the victims of the 9/11 terror attacks.
So we've been monitoring the 9/11 memorial, and we monitor the number of birds in the beams. So the birds are attracted to these beams, they circle in the beams. And if the number of birds that are trapped in the beams get too high, we ask the Tribune and Light production team to turn the lights off, which they do for about 20 minutes. It allows those birds to disperse and carry on with migration, and then the lights go back on. And so last year, we didn't have to turn the lights off at all. In previous years, we've sometimes had to turn the lights off 8, 9, 10 times. It really depends on a lot of factors like the weather and the density of migration. Even wind direction can sort of affect how many birds are in our area and how the tribute affects those birds.
Staten Island can only be reached from Manhattan by ferry. For ages, the island was New York's unloved stepchild, but that is about to change. Key to that is Fresh Kills Park. Formerly a landfill that dramatically polluted the natural habitat. Biologist Shannon Curley and adjunct professor Jose Ramirez Garofalo conduct research at Staten Island College and work for the park.
The most fun of this job is seeing the birds come back year after year, especially birds that we've marked in the past, and seeing them return to the park.
The young conservationists are not deterred by the scorching sun. They want to find out which animals have returned to the park and whether or not nature will recover from centuries of pollution.
Where do you think we should go first?
We're gonna go scout out some sites on northbound.
The 2,200 acres of green covers 50 years of New York's history. For half a century, most of the city's garbage was dumped right here. Until 2001, Freshkills was the largest landfill in the world, with mountains of garbage so high astronauts could see them from space.
So this park is about 3 times the size of Central Park, and it's primarily composed of reclaimed grassland. So we actually get a lot of different species that you wouldn't normally see in the city itself, so it's pretty cool.
Only a few miles away from Manhattan, Freshkills Park's open green space attracts animals that haven't been seen here for decades. Right now, the park is not open to the public. Only guided tours are possible.
This was the first spot when I first came to the park that I first saw. Still, every time we come here, I'm still blown away by that view.
Fresh Kills is a model for turning a former landfill into a natural oasis. Its story begins when the city decides to close the garbage dump at the end of the 1990s. The pressing question, what to do with the waste? After a fierce discussion, a genius idea takes shape. Cover the mountains of waste with large tarps. Collect the wastewater and clarify it before its released into the ground. A detailed plan emerges that includes the planting of grasslands, because grass roots don't grow as deep as tree roots, and grass is a unique and rare habitat for many species.
It's kind of good to keep an idea of how well the birds are doing here at the park. So there's a lot of different research projects going on here. So one of the major ones are the grassland bird surveys. We look at how many breeding pairs we can find, and they seem to be doing pretty well because they're coming back to the park.
Chicken nuggets.
I know.
Chicken nuggets.
Lunch break. Not easy in a wildlife habitat. The naturalists are distracted by a surprising discovery. This time, it is a fox family with cubs. A short stop on the way back to the ranger station along the shore of the wetlands.
Jose, take a look down there. I think there's a lesser yellow legs, and it looks like a greater right next to it, but it's hard to tell because they're kind of far back, but they're on the flats over here. Are they still doing the feeding behavior?
Yeah.
What they will sometimes do is the cormorants and the egrets will kind of congregate together, and they'll follow in the shallow waters the groups of fish and kind of collectively push the fish together, and then they all kind of feed together, picking off the fish. So that's kind of what they're doing right here.
Is that a grasshopper sparrow?
Wow.
Some might wonder what will happen to the garbage rotting beneath the tarp. It will decompose over the next decades, producing dangerous greenhouse gases. Those smokestacks don't belong to a factory, but owe their existence to a clever idea. Instead of releasing the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, they are purified into heating fuel. The result? Warm houses on Staten Island. Those flares help create the vacuum needed to channel the gas into the local supply system. On top of the world's largest mountains of garbage, a nature preserve has emerged. Once the remaining garbage no longer poses a threat, sometime within the next 15 years, the park will be open to the public, and a quarter of Staten Island will be open green space and a park a stone's throw from Manhattan. An example of a successful transformation. Fresh Kills offers scientists like Kate Fields endless opportunities.
My job with Fresh Kills Park, I'm the manager for science and research development. I also interface with other groups that are doing research here. Let them do their research for their academic pursuits, but also to use what they're finding and use it to inform park development. I work on a multidisciplinary team, so we're a very small team that's sort of dedicated to fresh kills. We're within the much larger structure of the New York City Parks Department. I'm the only person on the Parks Department end of the team who's focused on the ecology. And obviously we work with other people who focus on that too.
Today, together with Shannon and Jose, she is trying to catch grasshopper sparrows.
We have two things playing in our favor. There are a lot of grasshopper sparrows that are nesting on this slope right here. And so what we do is we'll walk down and we'll draw them into the net, and they won't be able to see the net as they're flying over.
In spite of the tightly knit nets, catching a grasshopper sparrow is a real art.
One thing to remember is these are ground nesting birds, and a majority of them stay low, like the grasshopper sparrows. They don't usually fly over our nets, they walk under our nets, which is unfortunately the problem. But also, we have birds on this side, which we can also sort of walk up into the net that are nesting right along the bottom of this ridge. And we have some high vegetation on this side, which gives them less of advantage of the net. So this is a spot that we've been very successful in the past.
Indeed, it isn't long before the first bird is caught.
Get it. We got a bird already, kid.
All right.
Savannah.
That was very unexpected.
So this is a Savannah sparrow.
All right, side. Is this Savannah or grasshopper?
Savannah, yeah. All right. Well, that never happened.
So we've got we want to ban this bird as quickly as possible so we don't stress him out. So we're gonna move over to the area that we have our data book.
Beautiful. And if there's fat present, you'll see it underneath the skin a little bit. It's going to be maybe a little yellow in color, but usually at this time they don't have.
And it weighs 20.8 grams.
Great.
Today is going to be banded on its right leg. And when we band them, we make sure that we do it in a way so that there's no overlap and there's no gap in the band.
The aluminum band, so this helps us kind of get an idea of where this bird is spending time in the park.
So tiny.
He is. And I'm going to hold him like this.
Unfortunately, it's not a grasshopper sparrow, but a related species.
In order to do this, you have to get a special permit from the U.S. Geological Survey, which Shannon and I both have. It's a long process, so
it's practice, but the whole idea is kind of minimize their stress, get the data that we need, and then send them on their way.
These are really specialist birds. They only nest in grasses. They don't nest in like your lawn. They need hundreds of acres. So this is one of the only places that they can nest in the whole region. Grasslands are the most critically endangered habitat in the world. It's just one that nobody talks about. We have less than 5% of our remaining grasslands in the United States. So there used to be a lot more. Everyone thinks we got to put all the trees back, but we actually have a lot of trees right now. I mean, we can always use more, don't get me wrong, but we're really focused on habitat diversity as well, and not just trying to provide trees, but trying to provide this critically endangered habitat.
A change of location, but still in Fresh Kills Park, on the shore of one of its many creeks. Kate and Shannon aren't just kayaking for fun. What looks like a vacation is in fact hard work. They want to find out whether or not the shoreline will hold up to the pressure of the waste. The name Fresh Kills, by the way, comes from the Dutch settlers. Kill, in their language, simply meant creek. The water's edge has been completely made over.
This is a pilot project. So, we have 13 kilometers of shoreline here. This is just a 2.1 acre plot, right? It's not meant to be, restoring all of Freshkills. It's meant to sort of see what strategies work for this location and what strategies can we potentially use in other areas of the site.
During torrential rainfall or hurricanes in particular, these wetlands prevent flooding. They hold the water and release it directly into the sea.
All of these hills that you're seeing around us were all flat. All right, so this was all tidal marsh. These creeks ran through. All of these hills, again, are landfill. And what you're seeing along the very edge of the shoreline here is really what everything used to look like before landfill operations began. Part of it is a beautification, you can think of it that way, but that's really all you see right now in what you might think of as beautified is part of the actual closure of the landfill. It's done to stabilize the landfill and prevent any landfill byproducts from getting into the environment around us.
Essential to that is what is growing beneath the surface of the water.
It also just helps sort of stabilize the sediment so that that doesn't wash away as easily. We don't have as much erosion when we have these native grasses. And then one of the projects we have is also looking at the bivalves that attach to the base of these native grasses.
Kate is looking for a particular shellfish, the American ribbed mussel. It will support the grass and prevent erosion.
Some of those are ribbed mussel shells that are in there. And ribbed mussels actually perform a lot of the same ecosystem services that oysters perform. Filter the water. They also attach to the bases of these grasses and physically strengthen the shoreline.
It is not yet known whether any pollution will escape the encapsulated waste. It will take long-term observation to ensure that this impressive and unique watershed in the middle of New York will be safe and can be made accessible to the people. If the committed work of conservationists pays off and the city's ecosystems can be regenerated, the inner city biotopes and habitats will flourish, and nature photographer Francois will keep getting his stars, the animals of New York, in front of his lens.
Oh yeah, by the way, there are many raccoons again in Central Park, lots of them. And I guess they had a lot of youngs. This one was photographed here in winter at Central Park, where we can see a lot of them.
In search of spectacular subjects, he roams the city. He is on the lookout for a very special animal.
We were talking about snowy owls, and I was saying that they usually show up here in winter on the coast in Queens on a dune, because the coastal landscape, it looks a little bit like the Arctic, no trees. And what happened is this past winter, for the first time after over 100 years, we got a snowy owl in Central Park that stayed for quite a bit. And I was able to photograph it many times and also following it during the hunting. I went to Central Park 15 times and maybe more, and I was always hoping to get some images and some filming also. Yeah. It's on top of the pine. There it goes. It just flew off. And it's tricky. Yeah. Okay, it's gonna go. So one day, as I always watch the bird alert, it was reported there. Somebody had spotted it. When I saw this alert, I packed my camera, tripod, and everything, and I just went there. And as you can see, it's a difficult shot because it's surrounded by people, because Central Park is in the middle of the city. It's full. It's very busy. So I spend probably 4 hours there. Before the light wasn't interesting, and as the light went down, it became better. And it's one of my 10 favorite photos, and it's right here. And the highlight was to photograph it in front of the full moon in February, called the snow moon.
When winter falls over the small archipelago of Pelham Bay, the beach where thousands of New Yorkers enjoy the summer is once more taken over by nature. Beginning in November, seals arriving from the north make those waters their home for the winter. Seals in New York City are still rare. Christy Biolsi and Kevin Wu are with the Center for the Study of Pinniped Ecology and Cognition. During the winter, they visit these 16,000-year-old rocks on the edge of Orchard Beach every week to check on the seals living there.
They're quite different locations physically in terms of where they are. Here, Orchard Beach is, I wouldn't say secluded because we're still in the Bronx and it's still a pretty major waterway overall. But in each case, we're talking about rocky outcroppings where they come out on top to rest. So we've been looking at when they start making their way here for this year, what the numbers are, how many there are at our two main sites. And offhand, just from what we've been doing and what we've been seeing throughout the year, I'd say we have a pretty successful season with some stable numbers of seals in the area.
20 years ago, the seals returned to New York for the first time in more than a century. Now, Kevin and Christy want to find out if the same animals return every year and how they spread out in the New York area.
Since we've been doing this work, we're fairly certain that at least these individuals are likely returning to the same spots kind of year after year. And as we begin to survey them some more, we're seeing slight trends to show an increase in numbers over the last few years.
This, in fact, is a good finding.
Up here in the urban environment, we have a pretty good feeling that they're actually moving around to different desirable haul-out sites and using sort of the waterways that are available to them, like the Hudson River, likely the East River. We've managed to see harbor seals right here in between the Throgs Neck and Whitestone Bridge, so it's even more of an indicator that these areas are, one, desirable, and two, a rather safe location to haul out.
Christy and Kevin's data reflects the animal's behavior and are an important benchmark for the water quality in New York.
What's one of the big questions that we have of what are the factors that are leading to them coming back into the New York waterways? And it's probably not surprising to say that my answer is that there's a lot of variables, one of which is definitely the improved water quality, which means you have more life. The ecosystem broadly is thriving, and so then you have more, for the seals in particular, more fish. So they're making good use of a recently improved habitat here.
Good news for the seals. The ecosystem has improved. At the center, time and time again, is water, the source of all life. All around the world, population and its density is increasing in metropolises like New York. The key question is how wastewater and garbage can be reduced, and if relying on technical solutions is the only option, or whether in the end it is even more fundamental that people change their behavior.